I have nothing against you as a person. I don't know you.
You didn't say Jamie Kennedy's film needs to be stopped. You say Jamie Kennedy needs to be stopped. How can that not be anything but personal?
It's referring to your career.
Do you think that I shouldn't have a career?
It's hard to say.
I am talented.
Well, that's your opinion.
Hello, listening people.
Hello.
Hello, Bartek. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well, Ryan. How are you?
Get off the stage.
Oh,
Get off the stage.
Oh, fuck you. Fuck you.
Demonetized.
No, sorry, I should have said, like, what'd you say? What'd you say? Say it again.
Say it again. You think you're funny? We've heard it all before. We've heard it before, Bartek, that we're both spitting young gentlemen. We both happen to be Polish. This is Pictures Powwow, where we talk about a movie that comes recommended. We've heard it all before. Get over yourself. Now let's please reference the most infamous comedian meltdown of Michael Richards for as short as possible, as short as humanly possible, because it has to be mentioned. But also not. But Bartek, to put all of the jokes aside and the heckles aside.
Yeah, all this foreshadowing.
All of this epic foreshadowing and owning of the critics out there, which we are included as, because we put out things that have review in the title. So, we're monsters. We're part of the problem.
I like to think of them more as discussions, personally.
Oh, that's it. But we are making all of these jokes because you recommended a movie that dares.
I recommended a movie?
That's right, that dares.
Is this some sort of movie recommendation
We've been over it before, Bartek. We heard it all before. Fuck you. I have ears. I can hear you. No, we are a podcast that talk about movies that come recommended. You recommended the movie for this week's discussion. What was it, and why are we talking this way? Why is this all happening?
Why? Yes, 3-week recommendation cycle, and I start them off, and this is the start of a cycle, and I chose the 2007 documentary film Heckler.
Which is a film about hecklers?
Yeah.
Question mark?
It's in the title, Ryan.
Oh, so it must be true.
Yeah.
If it's in the title, it must be true. So there we go.
I believe this is the third documentary that we're doing on our podcast overall.
Yes, and what a documentary it is. Heckler is a film that struggles to get past the hour mark, that is about what it is to be an entertainer and having to deal with hecklers.
Mm-hmm.
And what is a heckler? Well, the dictionary definition is given to us at the start of the film, and then they add a little bit more and a little bit more. And in all honesty, people, this is a weird movie that you should all give a watch for yourself. You may think you know what you're getting in for, and if you're like me, and you knew going in the twists and turns of the film per se, you're still not prepared for the material itself. So go onto YouTube, go onto Tubi, go on and buy a DVD, go wherever you must, and watch the 2007 film Heckler, because if we just said to you right now, oh yeah, it's a movie about heckling, that's not going to entice you enough. Put it on. Give it your time, and you will be thankful? You'll definitely be intrigued.
You'll get a lot of perspectives.
Oh, so many perspectives. A shotgun blast of perspectives. Now we've got that out of the way. I had never seen this movie, but I'd heard about it from you. You have talked about this on the podcast. You have mentioned the weird, bizarre structure of it, the weird intentions of it, the ending of the movie, and how it got into, by accident in a weird way, the sad psyche of the actor/comedian Jamie Kennedy.
Yeah, I think I summarized it in the Max Keeble episode when I was telling our friends about it.
Yes.
From chats.
So how did you actually find this, though?
So, I found out about this from a Let's Play, actually. Oni Plays, one of their best Let's Plays is of Crash Bandicoot 2, where they go through the whole thing. And it just came up in conversation at one point where the main guy of the channel just basically laid out, the premise as I've explained it to you, where it's like, it's about hecklers, and the beginning of it, is on point, and then it just devolves into, the one man's psyche about an experience that has kind of traumatized him. And I guess, all those years ago, I was intrigued enough to check it out on my own.
And what was that experience like?
I think it's because I found out about it in a period where you and I were watching documentaries and you were recommending a lot to me, and I was checking out some on my own. So yeah, maybe that would have been it. What was your question, sorry?
What was the experience like, though, actually sitting down and seeing it for yourself? Because I can just say, like a moment ago, hearing about it was very different to actually sitting down and bathing in this mess.
It was just a really interesting. I remember that first time how the first 25 minutes really is on point. It's on topic. And then, you have a second act where it's like, okay, you're kind of there, but, you've moved on from it a little bit. And then you just see it slowly nudge over to, the Son of the Mask third.
/ Malibu's Most Wanted. Do not forget about his other film. He's very upset about. This is an oddity because we have covered a few on our podcast a few times, as you said, documentaries.
Mm-hmm.
And documentaries are things you and I enjoy, whether they be films or series. And we have very much enjoyed super specific types that focus in on a niche, on a subculture, on a random concept or group. Tickled being a great example of an investigative piece that spawned out of nowhere, or Louis Theroux and how he loves to, dive into the cesspool and see what happens. And those can be fun. Or you can have kooky ones where it's like, what if we followed, what happens if we followed this politician and a sexting event happened during his campaign? Oh, here we go. Those are fun. Now, what is bothersome about Heckler is it presents for the entire runtime 15 million different versions of what could have been a good documentary, or at least a competent one. And it never settles down. It never hones in. There's no vision behind this. And when it does start to focus in on certain things, as we all know, it's so devoid, or at least so far removed from the title and from what you believe this was going to be. This is a real case of you are being sold a lie when you walk into this. I knew the first 20 minutes were going to be the straight to camera, like, here's what it's like to be a comedian, here's what it's like to be heckled, and then it would devolve from there. But even that's a lie, because there's so many things within that first 20 minutes that don't cohere, that don't line up with one another. If you just want to take the first 20 minutes, talk about that as like a short film about a short documentary about comedians and hecklers, there's so many disparate elements clashing with one another. And that only gets worse and worse once we lose the thread of what the movie said it was going to be about. This is one of my favorite types of failures, in which they had an idea and they got so egotistical about other things that they lost what was the good thing in the first place. And what was that ego? What was that all about? And instead of probably discussing the actual film, most likely our podcast, at least several times over, we'll be talking about what it should have done, what it could have been, and what we psychoanalyze out of Jamie Kennedy, rather than what's actually maybe in the movie itself, because it's boring. It's like boringly shot. And if you actually want to take it on like proper critical face value, it's repetitive. And it doesn't gain any new insights onto things that you probably didn't know before going in.
Yeah, the structure of this one is basically that, every 10 or so minutes, a question will appear. It's like, what is heckling, or how do you deal with hecklers, or something like that. And then it's just, basically a montage of like the different people who are comedians or creators just giving their answer, and then the next one, and then the next one, then the next one. So you are getting, that's what we said before about like all the different perspectives. And they are varied, at least. There are some, really good answers, and then there are some, as you said, repetitive answers.
Biased answers.
Very biased answers, yeah. Like Joe Rogan's statistic about like 100% of them are definitely assholes or whatever.
It's such a time capsule as well, because this is in 2007 and they're worried about the rise of the internet. And this is in an age before we have smartphones, but we have mobile phones. This is in an age before the real kickoff of YouTube and social medias, but we do have them. They're kind of around. This is before the age of critics can just be people like you and me,
Yeah,
or people on YouTube
like
that are just personality driven.
It's like the third or fourth year of YouTube, I think.
Yeah. This is before all of that. If they did this a few years later, you could have, and I don't mean this to be like silly, you could have had them sitting there talking about the Nostalgia Critic. You could have had them sitting there talking about
YouTube comments,
YouTube commentary, or or online in a different way. But this is in that awkward phase of transition. The movie came out too early, but again, it's not about heckling. That's not about heckling. That's about other things. It's supposed to be about heckling. And yet it loses that so viciously.
Yeah, in the end, it becomes more just criticism in general, or critics.
Yes, it has a big bone to pick with the critics out there. But how was it for you on this revisit?
Yeah, that whole structure about how I knew walking in that, this is the third documentary we've done, and this is the first one where it's not following like a sort of running narrative where, Tickled was about, a conspiracy basically being explored and unraveled, and then American Movie was about this one person who's, been working on things, and you find out about his life. I remember that this one was very much a broad exploration of a topic, and I was wondering how that would go with this one. But even remembering that, it didn't really have that much of a running narrative until kind of like the Jamie Kennedy parts. It was very repetitive, and I wasn't really bored by it, but it did feel kind of exhausting to go through it.
I just want to, and this is my opinion, I want to refute any merits that the film can be given, specifically to the section about heckling itself, the 20 minutes. I don't want to praise that because they managed to stay on topic. It's boring to me because the stories themselves don't have a context for a lot of them. We are many times over, you are just being plopped into a talking head of some comedian, and we're halfway through a story of them being heckled, or we don't really get the proper frame of reference for their heckle story. So even if it is funny or traumatizing or life-changing or whatever the case may be, many of them don't get to truly be that because we are robbed of context. We are just coming into we're walking into an interview halfway through. So there are many moments where this person's saying something, and instead of me feeling for them, I feel repelled by them or alienated or outright annoyed by them because what I've been given is unlikable. And yet I know that perhaps if there was more of this moment from this comedian, I would have more of a frame of reference. But there are so many times over in which you get one sentence soundbite from a comedian that makes him sound reprehensible, but it's supposed to be framed as nice or good or thoughtful or inspirational or harrowing, and then you move on. The structure of just the first 20 minutes is so scattershot.
Yeah, it's like
edited down to shit.
Yeah, if you got like the full like raw footage of like the entire interview with that person, it would be a lot more impactful.
What did you feel about the actual heckling part of the documentary Heckled? Because you've mentioned in the past and here that that's the kind of stretch of the movie where it's like it's on topic.
On topic, yeah, that's what I said. Um, like I said, there were some perspectives there that were interesting because I do listen to some stand-up comedy. I have heard stand-up comedians talk about their craft before, so I connected a lot of the things that were being said there to a lot of things that I heard from those stand-up comedians. Like, there's a podcast that I listen to about these three edgy comedians called Cumtown.
Mm-hmm.
And they talk a lot about, stand-up comedy, doing it, how it can be easy or hard sometimes, how sometimes it's just normal that you will completely flop, and talking about all the sorts of comedians that they've met or the ones that they aspire to be like or have been successful and a lot about heckling and crowd work and how you respond to hecklers. And it was interesting, getting all these different perspectives. Like I remember, and it's a technique that they do where, they'll ask someone to repeat what they said, with the heckler to repeat what they said, and then they'll use that time where they're repeating what they're saying to formulate a response to really get them and, get the crowd laughing at the heckler to shut them up.
Yeah, and there's a variety of opinions about how to interact or deal with hecklers and what is the ownership and responsibility of the comedian and the heckler dynamic. There are several comedians who relish in hecklers and think that it's great and that they love to spar with them and or shut them down. There's ones who loathe them and hate them and believe that they ruin the act at all times and why can't you just get up and leave and things like that. And I found that kind of interesting, the different mentalities and beliefs from certain comedians when it comes to hecklers. Like, do they have any right to exist? Like, we get examples of hecklers ruining shows. We get examples of comedians ruining their own shows because of overreacting to hecklers. We get examples of hecklers improving a show and making the comedian look even wittier and better and funnier. There's a variety of hecklers' impacts on the act, and yet certain comedians, many of them, believe there is not a variety. It is just this one thing that they believe in, which was probably the most interesting part of hearing these comedians talk about hecklers and seeing how extreme their views are on them. Like, some of them are like, I want to bash them, and some of them are, I would relish in killing them, and some of them are like are more aware of the comedian's role of, if you get rattled by a heckler, then you're not good enough at your job. And or you have someone like Craig Ferguson talking about, like, if you really love what you're doing, then you have this confidence and you're fucking bulletproof and you just keep going. Like, very interesting subject. Then you have a whole slew of different people to talk to about it.
Yeah, and even from a performer perspective, it's inherently interesting because when you see the comedians on stage, they are doing a performance. They've rehearsed this. There's multiple mentions of like, get a heckler and like halfway through your punchline of your joke and it just ruins everything. And they do seem so confident when everything is going well, and having these interviews where they're talking straight to the camera about their feelings about this whole thing. It does show you another side. It humanizes the stand-up comedians who tend to seem so larger than life,
and or in some cases vilify them, because we see certain stand-up comedians really fly off the handle and ruin the mood of the night.
Yeah, there was that one. I think it was the Bill Hicks one where
oh yeah,
he was getting really mad and like the people were laughing at it, but he just kept going and kept going, and then like it started getting really quiet.
But then you have the other one that was in the more modern day comedy club of that guy who's like he had the whole bit about like, we've heard it all before. That guy immediately was offset by the crowd, like no one was reacting positively. Or Jamie Kennedy trying to do the more humorous, like back and forth thing, didn't work for certain people. And so even different ways of managing the crowd can turn the crowd against you. It's not just, oh, you blow up at the crowd and they turn against you. Like, You can see Jamie Kennedy trying to build a rapport and make new jokes didn't land with certain audiences either. And what's that about? Why does that method not work? Like, you understand why the yelling at the crowd doesn't work, but why does certain other things? And the film's not interested in talking about that part of it. I was totally thrown off by, and I want to get your opinion on this. They don't talk to just comedians in this 20-minute section.
Mm-hmm.
They don't just talk to comedians. They don't just show comedians struggling from hecklers, which is what I thought this documentary was going to be. I thought it was going to be nothing but comedians / actors. But there were so many different types of entertainment people here. And I found the most fascinating one to be the one that was underrepresented, which was sports. They have very early on a coach talk about this. And then you saw footage of like a football player after a big game they lost, and he's just getting yelled at. And I wanted to hear more about that because unlike the comedians who, that's a part of the job. They are entertainers. They get out on a stage. It's, as much as they may not like it, it is a part of what they have to do. The sports people and some of these other people in the entertainment industry, this side of it isn't something that is part and parcel of their job, and yet some of them have to deal with it anyway. I wanted more of that.
Yeah, and again, going back to the humanizing aspect, there was that one guy who, he was in the middle of an interview in a public spot, and just every time someone was heckling him, he would just go quiet, wait for it to finish, and that was a completely different, sort of thing to look at for us as an audience member.
Again, that one was just a football player, I'm pretty sure. And
yeah, it was.
But that's exactly it. He's not equipped to have to deal with that type of thing because that's not what his job is supposed to be. While comedians, as much as they don't like it, that is a part of their hustle and bustle. Like, that's a part of what they have to get up and do.
I guess, yeah, the equivalent would be like if the whole stadium was like chanting to taunt them or something, yeah.
That's it. And it's just such an annoyance because the movie does that. They keep throwing in these different people who also get heckled, but then keep coming back to
they had dancers
the poor
at one point.
Yeah, the dancers, journalists. They had film critics themselves. They have filmmakers. They have all these different people, all these different ilks and creeds of the entertainment world, or people who have to deal with the public. But then they keep coming back to the comedians who bitch and moan and cry about how no other people have jobs like us. Yet the film itself is showing that the thing that you are saying no one else has to suffer through, it shows you there are other people who do. So what's the message? You spend the first 20 minutes showing us many different people having to go through the woes of being criticized. And then you spend the rest of the movie going, it's only the comedians and the funny people and those, the creatives. Only they have to go through this. Oh, really? Go to interview a cashier at a fucking retail and tell me that they don't get an earful about something from some customer. You fucking tell me that.
People that work in sales and retail. Yeah.
We have friends, we have family who work in those places, and I'll bet you they could tell you stories that would make your ears fall off.
Yeah, there's one friend we have on Facebook. Whenever I see the statuses from her that aren't about, her hobbies, it's usually talking about something at work that happened where it's like, guys, don't come in with, big requests 5 minutes before closing.
But again, only the comedians get heckled and criticized and get an earful while they do their job.
Yeah, and because like you were saying before, we don't get like the full extent of like what they're saying. You're just getting these snippets. Eventually, it does get to the point where it's like, you guys are rich,
Yeah.
Well, what are you worried about? Did
you note down how long it took for a woman to pop up in this? 14 minutes. 14 minutes, I noticed, it took for Maria Bamford to show up and bring up misogyny. And that was another thing. The privilege of this all. There are people here that aren't getting their story told fully because they're uncomfortable. So let's hear from Joe Rogan. Let's hear from, Jamie Kennedy. Let's hear from this person. whine about how someone said their jokes that were racist or sexist and or just not funny. Because if we actually spend time with the female comedians or the comedians of a different race other than white, it may be less fun for the documentary. You got 1 or 2 stories included, and they weren't fun stories, but they were the most like memorable in my mind of like these, like the was it Bobby Lee, I believe his
Oh
name
yeah,
was,
yeah, yeah.
and like how he got assaulted, and before that he was being, you know, victimized racially, and then he threw it back, and then he got knocked out, and we never hear from him again in the rest of the documentary.
Yeah, it was just the one time.
But let's cut back to, oh, poor old Joel Schumacher made a Batman movie that fucking made bank. Get criticized for making a comic book film. Boo-hoo. I love Joel Schumacher. I thought he was a great filmmaker. I don't give a fuck about his story. You know, I don't give a fuck about his story about being heckled for making a $100 million movie, blah, 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 that sold a bunch of merchandising, when in the same movie you have a woman talking about how she's worried about Millie being sexually assaulted because she's a comedian and the men think they're owed that. It's so wild that this is happening in this movie. Like, what did you feel about that stuff? Did you notice that? Did that stick out to you?
It definitely, now that we're talking about it, does stick out to me, yeah. I didn't note how long it took to hear from a woman comedian, but I have definitely noticed and even heard that, most stand-up comedians tend to be male, and a lot of the female ones tend to get, made fun of a lot or discriminated against.
There was just so many aspects of just that first 20 minutes where they weren't being honest of what you could be doing or should be doing. More stories from people who do get victimized rather than just the straight white guys who tell jokes. What about the men of color? What about the women? What about the disabled? Like, there are disabled comedians out there. There are so many different people out there who get it even more tough than just, Gilbert Gottfried. You know, there's just so many, and they show some of them in this movie, and they get the least amount of time to speak. It's so... because it's uncomfortable. The film doesn't want to be uncomfortable about those real-world things. It wants to be uncomfortable about how unfair critics are to these comedians who feel like they can just say or do or create or whatever they want without any repercussions and should be applauded and have their cocks sucked at all times. Like, that's what it's actually about.
And it's working its way over to, that one producer's experiences with critics.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it's just... I absolutely refute. I absolutely do not believe that even the first 20 minutes have merit to it, because whatever little amounts of merit they do have, you can tell the film is actively not interested in it. It's only putting it in there because we have to throw it a bone. We have to give women a voice at one point, or at least see their tits.
Yeah, that did happen.
That happened.
Yeah.
The funniest thing in the movie to me, just talk about funniness, was that moment in which we have this actress who I'd never heard of before. I looked her up. She starred in 6 things, but TV and film-wise. Maybe she's only in theater and ads. Who knows? But there's this actress, and she's talking about how she was a child actress and how she got criticized for her looks, and then, she's flat-chested, and when she was 15, her mother offered to get her implants and stuff, and she was horrified by this notion because in the Hollywood landscape, if you don't have big tits, you mean nothing, and you're not attractive. And she's like, well, I guess I'm not attractive. Now she's a full-grown woman. She's like, no, I guess I'm not attractive. And then suddenly, she unbuttons her shirt and shows us her breasts. Now, that's not the part I find funny. The part I find very funny, because it's just so bizarre, is the film has this talking head structure where it tells you who the person is, says their name, says their career, comedian, or maybe their website if they want to be super specific. So we have this actress, shows us her tits, cut to a new person who we haven't seen in the documentary before, and by the way, won't see again. And it just says transsexual. That's what their job was, I guess. And they tell a new fascinating story about what it's like to be heckled for being a person. Everyone else, even the comedians who are having racial prejudice thrown at them or misogyny, they're talking about it in the confines of their act. This person was just talking about their life. And then they moved on and we never come back to them.
Yeah, did they...
We don't know if they were a comedian. I looked them up.
Yeah, I guess I just thought they were because of what the documentary was. But
they're
no,
transsexual.
They're just transsexual.
And they were still talking about it as in the frame of their life.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that is weird now that you mention
that was my favorite funny part of the movie because it was so like the film itself was doing the thing. Like, here's tits. Transsexual now. Do you like that, guys? It's like, what are you doing here, movie? What's your point? What's your deal? Why are you doing this in this way? That's the whole entire discussion about Heckler is why is it like this? And you just want to fix it. You just want to fix this movie. It has so many talented people in it.
Yeah, the credits when it was just listing everyone that was in it just went on forever.
George Lucas is in this.
Yeah, right near the end.
Freddy Krueger showed up at one point. Oh my god.
And Harlan Williams.
Harlan Williams, like, yeah, there's a lot of people, Tom Green. Like, there's so many people. So many different types of people.
And Jamie Kennedy was there too.
Jamie Kennedy too. Anything else you want to say about like the actual 20-minute parts of it where it actually focused on the heckling? Because that is something like, oh, do you want to talk more, anything more to say about the part of the movie that actually is the topic that it's said to do?
No, I think we got it.
All right, now talk about the good stuff. Where do you want to go from there?
Well, after the heckling stuff, they start to, put into your head the idea that, hey, maybe heckling and criticism is kind of, similar.
They foreshadowed that in the dictionary definition at the beginning.
where they added their little section.
And then at the end of that, it faded away and the only words left were heckler and critic.
Yes, that's right.
That's what I meant by foreshadowing. I messaged Bartek, said, oh, there's some foreshadowing at the beginning, because I didn't know that they actually had any inkling. I thought it was just going to suddenly be like, oh, now it's about criticism. But no, they did give you a little taste at the very start.
That was a nice rewatch bonus for me. I didn't catch that the first time.
So talk to us about what they do now with the criticisms.
So we start to get a lot of things from the internet. A lot of Jamie Kennedy reading papers of that he's printed off the internet of reviews. For films or just criticism in general. And it's basically building up this idea that, heckling is a criticism of a person's act and reviews are a criticism of, people's arts or acts that they create. And it's all leading up to basically the last chunk of the documentary where it's not entirely, but almost all of it is about his films that were not very good, mainly Son of the Mask.
Yes, and Malibu's Most Wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And him being compared to the new Pauly Shore. Ironically, the film never has Pauly Shore in it and or speaks positively of him.
That's true, yeah.
Never defends him. Carrot Top gets a defense. But not at one point do they ever make reference to the fact that Pauly Shore was the sacrificial lamb in their view. Because no one is willing to defend Pauly Shore. Weird that. Weird. I noticed that. I noticed that the film, no one once ever gives a defense of Pauly Shore. They just have it as like a statement of fact. In a movie that's like refuting statements of fact like that. So you leapt straight to like that stuff. What's interesting is I think the film does structure-wise actually something to praise. It's almost like they go through progression of time because they start out with the people in the crowd who heckle.
Mm-hmm.
And they actually interview people in the crowd who heckle them and why they do it and why they're there. And like, they have these guys, several different guys talking to Jamie Kennedy or other people, giving their opinions on why they heckled them and like, here's what I'm doing and here's my viewpoints. And
yeah, and
do you want me to write jokes for you? Because Jamie, I'm not going to do that.
And none of them are like, sniggering trolls or anything like that. They are like kind of talking seriously.
Yes. And then you have the discussion of print media criticism The idea that there used to be a humility and humbleness to it. Nowadays, we have Perez Hilton and these monsters. Then we had the rise of television, and things were still normal. And Roger Ebert, we could respect him because he wrote films himself. But then things start to change. Things start to get more vicious as we enter this internet age. And even before then, there are people who no longer have credentials, who are critics. People who no longer have credentials are now making these comments. Oh, that's so unfair.
Yeah, there was one person who was like, no one, when they were a child, said, I want to be a critic.
That was Joel Schumacher.
Yeah, that's right. It was Joel Schumacher.
Famous director Joel Schumacher, who, went on to still direct some amazing movies, even after his comic book film, Batman Forever. He made Batman and Robin. There was just... To talk about just the hecklers themselves, and let's talk about the hecklers and the critics and the people that they interview who are, in quotations, the title of the film.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm being biased here because the movie's so sloppy, but were they the 99% of the time the most level-headed, sympathetic people that they interviewed in the movie and the most well-spoken?
So that's kind of what I want to get into here too, where you mentioned before that when we were looking at the stand-up comedians and all the people who were giving their very short snippets of their interviews, and it's like, I want to hear more from them. Like, that was something that I subconsciously noticed with them, but with the hecklers themselves, I was more consciously thinking that, where it was like, oh yeah, these guys are speaking a little bit more level-headed than I would expect, and they have said some stuff that I would be keen to hear explored a bit more. But then when it cut away from them and you don't see them again, it really, I felt that absence.
Or when the film would literally pause and have a piece of text to try and rebut them, they're not getting a chance to speak for themselves there. The film is robbing their voice literally to make a fool of them, even though in the end, the movie is the one making a fool of itself, and you are actually on the heckler's side more because you're aware of the fact that the film isn't being fair. They are actually being fair. Like, those three dudes, or two or three dudes that are talking to Jamie Kennedy, and one of them's like in quotations, a babysitter. And Jamie Kennedy just starts making fun of him for being a male babysitter, and do you like baby poop jokes and stuff like that. And what the guy is discussing is something that is very true. And if you want to make an actual documentary about hecklers, you should actually talk to the hecklers, whether they be the ones who are drunks or the ones who are this, or the ones who want to be whatever the comedians label them as. None of them labeled the hecklers with what this man was talking about, which is, I'm a patron. I've paid to be there.
Yeah.
And you are fucking it up. And I want to express my disappointment with you fucking it up so you can get better, or for you to stop being as bad as you are. That's a very visceral and real feeling I think we've all experienced when going to live events. Whether you actually are the person who says it out loud, or you sit in your seat and you feel it. That's a true thing, and none of the comedians acknowledge that. None of them. It had to take for the actual hecklers and the critics to acknowledge that very real sense of going to something that's entertaining, which is, I'm going out of my way to spend my Friday night, I've dropped $20 or $30 or $100 or whatever it is to watch you do this thing, and your fucking opening guy was funnier than you were. And the way that man expressed that was way more calm and level-headed than me doing it right now. Because I'm pissed about the movie. This man was wrangled into this documentary where Jamie Kennedy is treating him like garbage, and he comes out much more virtuous and likable. I wanted to know more about that guy. I wanted him to be the center of the documentary more than Jamie Kennedy.
There was also, I think this might have been a bit earlier in the documentary, but they were talking about some of us, we get the hecklers to come on stage and do, their own thing and see how they fuck up and see how they like it. But then the example that they used was a relatively calm guy who seemed to actually be trying a little bit. Yeah. And you end up feeling kind of, at least for me, I felt a little bit bad for him. Because when the first thing he said was just oh yeah, this is the first live show that I've been to. I didn't even know what the heckle was.
Yeah.
It just cut to, the conversation that they were having.
There's also moments where they show positive interactions with hecklers that made the show funnier, which feels like it goes counter to the movie's points.
Hmm.
Because we are both people who have done live performances. We are both people who have participated in improv or improvisation.
Mm-hmm.
And there are times where, the interruptions of the public can be really annoying. But at the same time, there are weird little joys and wonders to it as well that happen. And whether you or I or performers are in it or audience members and we see that happen, sometimes it can be really magical when some random quote unquote heckling happens and it just actually improves the show itself. Like it does happen now, not all the time, but it does happen, and the film wants to treat it like it never does, but then actually does it feels like accidentally show you that it does happen.
It turns from heckling into like crowd work, as they call
Yes.
it. Yeah.
When I first came down to Melbourne, I went to the Melbourne Comedy Festival, and there was a comedian there that I knew from his like TV guest spot appearances, Akmal, and I liked him. But I saw his stand-up show and I didn't really like it because he didn't have any material. He was just doing crowd work the entire hour.
Hmm.
And I didn't really like that, but that's a method. And, if you interviewed him, would he say heckling's bad? I don't think so, because that's literally a part of his act. That's a part of comedians' act, is crowd work and wanting people to, talk to them, engage with them, heckle them, give them some beef, and so that they can do their thing. But they don't talk about that in this documentary. They're too cowardly. But then, it's about criticism. And that's such a stretch. You go, okay, criticism's now heckling. I think we're kind of moved past the purview of what heckling is, but the film's going to try and make its case for heckling's kind of criticism. So, isn't criticism kind of heckling? Bartek?
Yeah, well, the film says so it must be.
Do you agree with what the film says about it? Do you agree with its case?
If the film was called criticism, then sure, they could have done it the reverse, where it's like, oh, heckling's a type of criticism, but I don't think it goes both ways.
No.
Especially, because a lot of the examples later on are, things that are written down on websites. It's just things that are statically existing, and you're going out of your way to talk about them. Mm-hmm. Whereas heckling it's as the beginning of the film talks about, it's like an interruption. The job that I do teaching, I often get a type of heckling where someone calls out during class or, isn't doing the right thing at a certain time and I have to deal with it. And that's very different from, a piece of text.
Yeah, it is. To at least engage in some of the subject matters, or at least what I view some of the beliefs of the movie is getting at with the criticism stuff. I don't agree that criticism is heckling. I mean, the written or whatever critique styles, I don't agree. But there is a conversation to be had about the frustration that these professional entertainers have with any Joe Schmo now being considered worthy of a critic because of the internet age. If you have a forum or a blog or a YouTube channel or whatever it is, or in our case, a microphone, you are now considered a critic. Oh, what does some schmuck from chud.com? And it's not even the exclusive to the entertainers. Some of the actual film critics in this movie have frustrations with that being a thing too. And obviously, you and I are what they would consider a part of the problem. But in all realness, how do you feel about that stuff? Where the realm of criticism for media has gone beyond the journalist who's hired to do that, like the film critic who writes an article in the paper or is there to do their half-hour weekly television show where they catch you up on the movies, or the person on the radio. How do you feel about that change over our lifetime?
It is interesting, and goes back to what you were saying before about how, as we've developed over the course of the internet's lifespan, a lot of these examples of people online are people that for their criticism end up getting like fans who maybe like their style. Like there was that one, it was the one troll critic that was in the film, talking about how he just loves finding, extreme ways to make fun of something. Like I can imagine that there are people that would enjoy reading that for comedic value.
We grew up in the age of the comedic character reviewers or the shouting critics, where
Yeah.
Nostalgia Critic is a character in which he gets hyperbolic and mad about children's entertainment from his youth. And it's a joke.
Yeah.
And there has been plenty of discourse and discussion about the failure of film criticism in that way. Where you're not really getting an actual opinion. Is it devaluing or something like CinemaSins, where CinemaSins is like this morally bankrupt, creatively bankrupt form of film criticism, but yet at the same time it's really popular and all of this and da-da-da. There is something to be said here about the ever-changing landscape of the voice of criticism, and I think that is a worthy film in itself. But what angle do you take it at? And this is a film where it has bias throughout it. And the least interesting documentaries are the ones with such an overt negative bias towards the subject matter that they're investigating. They can be good, can be interesting, but if you are already on side of it, then what do you gain? When we talk about Louis Theroux, great documentarian, yeah, he's going to talk to the people from Hillsong. Yeah, he clearly doesn't agree with them, and you don't agree with them when you walk in, but he walks in to that with a certain demeanor of neutrality, and yet he still allows you to know that he doesn't agree with them. It's entertaining, thought-provoking, and whenever he gets a chance, he tries to humanize the subject matters that would never be humanized by us at home when given the chance, or by a documentary like this that would never do such a thing.
I think the scene in this documentary that I keep coming back to is the one where it's one of the ones with Jamie Kennedy sitting down with a critic. It's with the guy who at the end of it, like Jamie Kennedy talks about like that weird sex act.
Yes, that was Roper, wasn't it?
No. It was. I don't think he was a big celebrity guy. It was like a guy with glasses. He had like a website, and he
was very level-headed.
Yeah, he was well spoken, and he was talking about how I do reviews of films, and if there's a film that I especially hate, I might take a bit more liberties with my level-headedness, where I might exaggerate a little bit
because
more.
Because it's fun,
and it can help further accentuate like my feelings towards the film. And it was a really interesting perspective. And then Jamie Kennedy brings up like, have you had sex lately? Have you heard of this sex move?
And the guy's very funny because he says, well, yes, of course.
Yeah.
That type of thing. And then when he gets this grotesque sex act explained to him and he looks disgusted, Jamie Kennedy's like, so have you had that recently? He says, no, not recently. Like, he's still funny about it, but again, he's funnier than the comedian.
Yeah, but the point that I go to is like, what was that in service for on Jamie Kennedy's part? Because he's the producer of this film. He's the one that's trying to make a point, and it seems like it's just completely shut down the conversation that this guy was having with him.
It's just to humiliate.
Yeah,
it's to punish, vilify, humiliate, and ridicule the people who don't think he's funny. Same with the babysitter guy, who's not a professional critic, where the guy that got the sex act thing thrown at his way, a part of his job, maybe to a tiny degree, is to get pushback on his opinions, because his job is to give opinions. Like it's our job, like ours on the podcast or whatever it is, or Roper or Roger Ebert or any of it. It's their job to give opinions, and people can push back against those opinions. We still to this day make fun of Roger Ebert's review of Blue Velvet because he was wrong, so overtly wrong, but he still stood to that to the end of his life. And he knew that was his job. This critic knows it's his job, Jamie Kennedy doesn't understand that. So he's going to bring them in and make a documentary where he vilifies them and ridicules them. But he's also going to do it to this Joe Schmo who's just there to watch a comedy club act and didn't think it was that funny. He's going to treat them on the same level. And yet he's so frustrated when the critics don't treat things on the same level as one another.
So that made it really satisfying when you got the Roper segment where he was just like giving blunt answers, like, because I hate it. It wasn't good. I didn't like it. And he had nothing to say in response.
I really loathed the bits where they said, I do not understand why this criticism is so personal. And then the critic would say, well, you starred in it. And I'm using you because I did not like what you did. It's not me saying I don't like you as a person. I did not like your act. I did not like your style, blah, blah, blah. But then they did this bullshit thing a couple of times where they would read reviews. They didn't have the people in. Read reviews of the person giving exactly the type of criticism that Jamie Kennedy, quote, like in quotes, finds appropriate, where they're talking about not the people but the production and blah, 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 and then still put it in the pile of like, this is a bad, like, this is bad. They used one where it's like this critic who they didn't interview just wrote a very reasonable review about the technical failings of the movie, the pacing, the structure, the usual thing, not labeling like Jamie Kennedy's a fucking monster or whatever, and used it as an example of this is the reason why the director of the film hasn't directed a film since 1997. And it's like, what is your point then? Because you're saying this is the appropriate, like, here's the appropriate way to do reviews. And then when you read a review that is exactly what is considered the appropriate way, you say, this is one that's bad. What's the rules then? If there are rules, what are the rules?
If it upsets me, it's bad.
This romanticism, too, of certain types of critics and or ages of critics. Like, you know, oh, well, back in the day, you know, they used to have humility. That was a statement. They used to be humble.
Like that. Yeah.
And they reference a few of them. But then if you know anything about those critics in particular, like your Roger Eberts, your Pauline Kaels, so on and so forth, there are people with greater reputations than Jamie Kennedy that could tell you that those people were terrible. Where was Ben Stiller's interview?
That's a good point.
Please follow through on what I mean by that statement.
Yep. I think we've talked about it multiple times on the podcast, but basically 2001, two very big things happened. One of them was the release of Zoolander, and the other was the tragedy of 9/11.
Yes.
And the fact that these two things happened so close to one another unfortunately led to Roger Ebert's review of Zoolander, where he slammed it not based on its own merits or failings, but for the fact that they dared to release a comedy film
after 9/11.
After 9/11.
And he does make it very personal about Ben Stiller. He puts the ownership on Ben Stiller. He puts the responsibility on Ben Stiller and says, how dare you? And he gave it a negative review and helped flush that film into the toilets. And Ben Stiller loathed that. And then years later, Roger Ebert apologized. Where was that statement? Like, that's legitimate. Like, if you're going to talk about, like, they even mentioned the Ace Ventura thing.
Yeah.
There are legitimate examples, but I was getting annoyed because
it was such an obvious one.
There's so many examples that go against what they are saying is the good. Oh, Roger Ebert and Pauline Kael and this. They're the good ones. To you, they're the good ones because they're the establishment, because they're the ones that have been around for decades. Are the Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel, quote unquote, the good ones to any horror filmmaker in the 80s? Or actor? Are they the good ones to the people that they literally doxed because they thought their films were morally reprehensible? Like that happened with the Friday the 13th movies.
Yeah.
They gave away their addresses and told people to actively harass them because of the movie they made. That's not discussed in this movie. That's not discussed in this documentary because it would go against the thing. Because at the end of the day, people are people. We're flawed. There's no perfect way to do this stuff.
Yeah.
You can't just point to the pillars of the establishment from like 20 years ago and say that's when we got it right, because no, it isn't. And it's not even just in America. I always think about here in Australia, we had David and Margaret with our Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel equivalents, and David Stratton did a very questionable move, which was he refused to review Romper Stomper. I talked about this on our Romper Stomper
I thought
episode.
it was that one, yeah.
Because he thought it was morally deplorable. He didn't want to promote it. He said it was a good movie. It was very well made, very well acted, but he did not want to give it a review because that would give something. But in so doing, he's giving it a review. And the director did not like that because it did not help the film. It only hurt it. And then when he saw David Stratton, he spat on him and said, "Never review any of my movies ever. If you don't want to review this one, never review them." That's something. That's something to talk about. Like, that's something that this film could, on a local scale, that's like, we understand this type of thing. But Heckler, the documentary, isn't about that. None of it's about that stuff. It's about Jamie Kennedy making a documentary to pity himself, and then at the end of it having the guy from chud.com who's a sex pest in real life. Yeah, that's what happened to him. Make some snarky fourth wall breaky ha ha ha. You can't criticize this movie for being self-indulgent pitying because I'm doing it at the end. Fuck you. Yes, I can. Because it's still that. Just because you put a lampshade on it doesn't mean it isn't what it is.
I'd almost forgotten that it ended with the chud.com guy.
Did you know... Okay, have you ever seen Gremlins?
No, I haven't actually.
Have you ever heard about Gremlins 2?
I have.
Okay.
Don't know the specifics off the top of my head.
So Gremlins is a beloved film, considered an iconic classic film. Believe it or not, some people gave it negative reviews when it came out. And one of them was Leonard Maltin, who's in this film as one of the main points of view of the critics.
Chud.com did not like him.
No, he didn't. Oh. But in Gremlins 2, directed by Joe Dante, the same director of Gremlins 1, they went with a very fourth wall breaking meta style to it, like live action Looney Tunes. You literally have like references to the first movie being a movie.
Yeah.
And Leonard Maltin is in Gremlins 2 as himself, giving a negative review to Gremlins 1. And then the Gremlins attack him and he says, he screams in pain that he changes his mind. He gives it a 10. That there says more about critics and has more wisdom than any of the points of view that the comedians and these hacks and Jamie Kennedy do about critics in this movie called Heckler. That says more to me than any... The fact that Leonard Maltin was in a movie where he's like, yeah, I gave Gremlins a negative review. Now I'm humble enough and human enough to be in the Gremlins 2 movie where they rip me to shreds and I take it back. I give it a 10. That's better. See, we're smiling and laughing at that, and then you remember the rest of it. Then you remember Heckler and you go, oh.
If only this film could have been made like a dozen or so years later, then we could have the Lady in the Water critic make a little reference.
My God. We could have got M. Night Shyamalan in this movie.
Yeah, that's another one.
We got George Lucas. I was surprised to see George Lucas. Joel Schumacher, man, he was in this movie. You know what one of the craziest people is? I'm forgetting his name. The guy from the writer of Scary Movies 3 and 4 is in this.
Yeah, he was the one that was talking about how it's made for the audience, and that audience loved it.
And he makes the very apt comparison of, Roger Ebert has an opinion, and the 7-year-old boy with Down syndrome has an opinion, or some crude statement like that. What's his name? Craig Mazin, I think is his name. Well, he's gone on to really love the critics because he makes some of the most critically acclaimed TV shows of the modern age with Chernobyl and the Last of Us TV series. He's a critical darling now.
Oh, he's the guy that's the ghostwriter or the Borderlands thing where he used the fake name, right?
For which one, sorry?
That Borderlands film that's out now.
Yes.
He took his name off it,
yes. He sure does love critics now. They're on his side, and he makes things that are of critical note. Oh, but I'm sure, he could go just fine without it. Are you sure there, mate? Are you sure? I was thinking Brie Larson with Captain Marvel, where she was talking about the critics as well. And she made it more specific about like white male critics, which is a interesting thing to mention. But it's also like Brie Larson, whose entire career has hinged on the fact that many critics have loved her work, and then turns around when she's successful enough and is like, we don't need critics. It's like, we don't need them, huh? My favorite person was in this documentary was that one guy. I don't know who it was, but he perfectly broke down what the role of a critic is, only to then bitch about it for the rest of the movie. He's like, a critic's job is to go to the thing and break it down and relay it to you and make sure that you understand if it's worth your money or not. And I'm like, that's it. Got it. It's as simple as that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the rest of the time, they're like, it's not as simple as that. Fuck them. I'm like...
It's really, really cohesive, this film, with its message.
Now, I've been talking for a while. You got to talk about Jamie Kennedy. You love this guy.
Do I?
You're his biggest fan.
Yeah, biggest fan because I've talked about this documentary for years. That's it.
Have you seen him in anything other than like we've seen him in Max Keeble, but like you are actually that familiar with Jamie Kennedy at all?
I honestly don't think I am.
And how did this?
I've seen this and I've seen Max Keeble. I don't know what else I have seen him in.
You haven't seen Son of the Mask?
I don't think I've seen Son of the Mask. I've seen The Mask.
You're the problem.
I am the problem. He's not Jim Carrey.
What do you get out of him in this?
I just keep coming back to the fact that he's, the producer of this film who, the producer's the person who really needs everything to come together, to work, to sell its point. And he presents himself so immaturely in this film. Like when we get to that third section, he's like on the computer being like, can you believe what these guys are saying about me? And his friends on the couch, I don't even know who that friend was. Just like, what are they saying about you? And it's like this it almost feels like a skit.
Yeah, and if it is, it's too sad.
Yeah.
To be funny. What about Deep Roy? Where Deep Roy, the dwarf actor, that he's in the jacuzzi with, the one who starred in many great films, including, as he mentions, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. That was a sketch, right? Like, that's written, that's like performed. Like, that is one of those staged bits where we're getting to a thesis point, but why is it like that? Why are we having this? Why is Jamie Kennedy's parents briefly in this movie? And when they are, you can tell that the film is edited to not have them in there because they keep telling him very harsh truths that shatter the illusion of the movie. Did you notice that? They keep being like, you have a real tough time being criticized. Like the film is like almost like, shut up, shut up, shut up. Don't mention that.
There was one point, and this was earlier in the film, where it was like two people, and it was like Jamie Kennedy's biggest fan and then her son. And the biggest fan doesn't say a single word, and it's just the son like being like, oh, those critics are stupid, fuck them. And I think in the credits it mentioned that it was like his sister and nephew or something like that.
And I think the director is his brother-in-law.
Is it?
Yeah, or was his brother-in-law. He was married to a Stephanie Kennedy. I couldn't find out if she was related to him. I didn't go that far. I'm sorry, Jamie, if I'm mistaken. I know you're listening. I'm getting very upset.
They referenced other Kennedys in this film.
Oh my god, that was funny too. When some of the hecklers were funnier than Jamie. Oh, wasn't it amazing that every time we saw Jamie Kennedy's stand-up, it was some of the most atrocious stand-up you've ever seen in your life, and you just have nothing but contempt when you see it, like his whole Mexican bit, and it was like, where's the joke? What is, so when the person heckles him, I'm on that guy's side. Or the one who's like making the JFK joke. I'm like, that was funnier than what we just saw Jamie doing on stage.
Oh, his retort to that one wasn't too bad.
The retorts are fine, but like the jokes he's telling on stage.
It could also just go back to what we said before about like we're only seeing snippets of the act. So You know,
Oh yeah, you got me there.
and it's usually like the punchline being interrupted or something.
You're
but
right. I
Mm.
take it back. Jamie Kennedy's
his
hilarious.
Mexican accent could have been, really amazing if we knew what came before.
That's it. The Mask, the Son of the Mask stuff is so weird because it's a kids movie too.
There was
And he's
that
treating
weird.
it like it's this like avant-garde thing that's never happened before ever.
There was that one lady when it was when he was getting like the pedicure. She was like, "Oh, we have the DVD at home," and I was like, "Oh, this is like a wholesome interaction." And then he like, pokes fun at her, and I was like, "Oh, she was actually being kind of nice."
This is a
What are you
film-
doing?
This is a film about a rich asshole who decided to use his wealth and time to convince and or lure famous people to, in a roundabout way, say that people were mean to him, and that's not nice.
It's funny you mentioned that he's a rich asshole because there's a shot of him getting something put up his asshole.
Oh my god. What was that?
It was comedy, right?
Oh, there you go. It was comedy, right? Is there anything else you want to say about Heckler?
Oh, speaking of comedy, well, the ending where he gives, the conclusion to his thesis. That's another thing that I always talked about this film, where with the exact same energy that he has throughout the rest of the film, whether it's like self-pity or like disinterest, is like, I've learned a lot on this journey. For the critics are valuable or something, and then sets it on fire and the two fat ladies, and then they walk away. It's it's amusing to talk about as a thing that exists, but it's a very jarring ending.
It's a film that has aged great because so many people in it are monsters now. Weird conservative freaks that have taken a lot of the attitudes they say in this and amplified it to a point where it actually kind of counters what they believe and or are the problem that they are saying are in this movie. There are so many of them that have gone on to be critics of their own.
There was
Isn't
one.
that funny?
Yeah, there was one that was like, "Oh, you're a big QAnon person."
Oh yeah, which one was that?
I think it was Roseanne Barr.
Oh, Roseanne Barr. Yeah. You got Bill Maher as well, who's like a weird figure of the industry. Like you got so many of them that are the things themselves. Like some of them are now known as like, oh, they are critics of whether it be entertainment or just social stuff. It's like, well, oh, do you not see? Or Joe Rogan, whatever the fuck his deal is. Yeah, it's just so hilarious of how many of these people are monsters. Like I said, the guy from chud.com got kicked off his own site and stuff because he's a sexual predator, and apparently now he's a Buddhist monk.
Oh.
Take that in. You've got another guy who like beat his wife. You got another guy in here who was like, I hate cancel culture because he got canceled for flipping off the photo of a dead Black Lives Matter protester. And it's like, I don't apologize. I'm like, okay.
You're being a heckler right now.
I'm being a heckler right now. These people can't defend themselves. Yeah, it's just hilarious how unlikable everyone is in this documentary. Or pretty much everyone is lower, in my opinion. Many of them I haven't even heard of or met before, but I walked out of this loathing them. So there's very few people who come out of this looking good. That's actually quite the feat for a documentary. That isn't trying to do that.
Do you like Uwe Boll more?
Well, yeah. You got my favorite was the one who wanted to fight him just to get a free trip.
Oh yeah, the founder of Something Awful, Low Tax.
Yeah, that was great. What about that guy who did what was it, the annoying, are you annoying.com or whatever it is, and like the weird criteria of what it is to be annoying, and you could tell he was like, this is really funny, but it wasn't, and so you just got to sit in this awkwardness of someone being like, isn't this really funny? And you're like, not really.
Yeah, it was like explaining like the many minor reasons why someone would be more annoying or less annoying.
This film was annoying. I hated it, but I am fascinated. If I could recommend something as a weird companion piece, I would recommend the Baron of Botox podcast documentary series, in which it was about the subject of this plastic surgeon in Hollywood, a very well-known figure who unfortunately committed suicide. And it's about this woman doing like a journalistic piece about who he was, what he was, and how he reached that point in his life. But it very quickly derails into this weird, egotistical piece that eventually turns on the audience. I would actually recommend that as a great companion to Heckler, because it's another weird vanity egotistical project that has a very obvious goal in mind that it somehow fumbles and it makes everything looks worse than it should have been. So that's what I would have to say. Heckler, everyone, it's a movie. It inspires me, because if this can be considered a documentary, then anything I do is a documentary. This was shot like shit too. It looked like garbage. Absolute garbage. It looked like someone filmed it in a toilet. It was so gross. It looked like the footage that a serial killer has, that they film on their couch before they go on their mass tirade. Like, it was awful looking. It looked like absolute garbage.
Okay, you're really being a heckler right now.
I'm being a real Joel Schumacher's rolling in his grave right now, because who grows up and wants to be a critic? Yeah. So that is Heckler. Do you recommend?
Yeah, I do. I've been lying all these years. I think this is the best documentary ever.
Thank you. Now it is my turn to recommend a film for our podcast. It is the year of musicals.
Mm-hmm.
This film was not a musical that you recommended. This was a documentary.
Oh, I thought you were talking about the film you were about to recommend.
The film I recommended is a musical, so
Mm-hmm.
I'm putting right your wrong. Here I am cleaning up your mess again.
Sure.
I'm heckling you.
You are heckling me.
And you can't get offended.
I wish I could remember what Chud.com said to Leonard Maltin, so I could say it to you right now. Fuck you, Ryan Slewinski, whatever.
I wish I could remember what He doesn't even have a name. So I am giving us a film that I do believe is on both of our lists of recommending.
Mm-hmm.
Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Oh, yes.
I actually kind of foreshadowed it because I mentioned Deep Roy and how he was in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, but I'm wanting to do Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the Gene Wilder
Yeah,
film.
I was really close to recommending that years ago.
And everyone should make sure to give it a viewing for yourself. And yes, I remembered a while back you were thinking of recommending it, but then you weren't. Then you didn't, and then you weren't too sure about it, and then you wishy-washy, and I was like, oh, that's on my list of things to recommend too, so maybe one day. So today, well, next week, will be the day.
Yeah, I've been wanting to rewatch it for so long. I loved that film when I was younger.
Well, get ready to rewatch it. Get ready to view the Germanness of it all, and appreciate the architecture.
Yeah. I think my DVD's fucked, though. I have to find another copy.
I'm sure you can find a copy easy enough. Everyone, make sure to watch the Gene Wilder, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. We're not doing the Johnny Depp one. We're not doing Charlie.
You're really weird.
Oh, my God. You know what we really needed from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory? We needed him to be Michael Jackson. What a brave move that was. Tim Burton strikes again, but not this time, because we're actually not talking about the Tim Burton one. We're talking about the OG. It is the OG, right? There was no other adaptations before then. It was that one.
No, just the original book.
That's it. That's it. So until next time, listening people, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook under Spit and Posh Presents. You can message us on those. You can hit us up with your film recommendations or your opinions on things we have discussed here today. You can email us if you want to do that more directly. Our email is
spitandpolished@gmail.com.
Oh, baby, that is exactly the email address. And we actually got a comment on our social media from our good friend Julio.
Ooh, yeah?
He wanted to let us know that he was shocked to find out that there was an American remake of Rashomon starring William Shatner. And we informed him about that.
Oh, because I mentioned the episode.
And he was shocked Now, he didn't ask if we would ever watch that version on this, but I wanted to ask, would you ever be inclined to watch the American redo of Rashomon at any point?
Yeah, just out of curiosity, I guess.
It's got Shatner in it, so it's got to, I don't know who he plays. If you had to guess who he played, who would it be?
Well, I think I said it in the episode. I think he played like the priest or something.
Oh, that's right. You said that. Oh, man. I guess that's fine. I would have loved for him to have played, the murderer.
The bandit.
The bandit. Could you imagine?
Well, we don't know who the murderer is, right?
Oh, sorry. We don't know. No one knows. No one knows, actually. But until next time, listening people, remember to be kind to each other, or Jamie Kennedy will make a documentary whining and complaining and cry. Oh, I loved when he cried or attempt to cry in this movie. Like, he would attempt as, blubbery, and you're like, Jamie, you're not that good of an actor. You're not that good of an actor, buddy.
When did he try to cry?
Oh, in the jacuzzi scene, he was getting all weepy as Deep Roy gave him meaningful lessons of life, and he's trying to get all blah, blah. Not full on tears, but he was getting I'm sad now. I'm Jamie. Shut up, Jamie Kennedy. I watched a video of his. He has a YouTube channel. It was a video of how he feels now about the failure of Son of the Mask, and it's a clickbait piece of shit where it was 14 videos, and he would spend half of them recapping. It was like watching a Dragon Ball, honestly, where you spend so much time recapping, and then you get to the subject matter, and then, oh, here's a sponsor, and then here's this. I watched 2 of them, and then I gave up, because whatever version of events he's trying to tell of Son of the Mask, I couldn't fathom it. I would also recommend those videos to see how Jamie Kennedy has changed to the YouTube age just to keep spinning bullshit.